Episode 83 of People I Know Show. Curt Carstensen joined today by Jon Laaser. I see some images behind me, and I'm pretty confident you're somewhere in Virginia right now.
I have, Curt. Good to see you, man. It's been far too long. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia, and we've got the intersection, of course, representing my marriage a couple of years back, and Lane Stadium, which I'm hoping to be in a few days.
Well, chat a little bit more about Blacksburg. That's a place I've never been and am curious about. But I guess to start the conversation, Jon, the reason I think most relevant at this time, I was looking forward to chatting with you, is about the college football season. I know we messaged a few weeks ago, right around the time that the Big Ten here in the Midwest was saying no football this fall. And my sense was you thought no college football anywhere. But over the last month, nothing's changed for the ACC and a few other conferences. Your season starts very soon. What's it been like preparing for this strange year?
Well, I think I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's been frustrating because it's, not like I'm out there playing or putting the pads on or doing anything like that, physically straining. But when you go through that emotional roller coaster and your entire livelihood depends obviously on these games happening, and that doesn't just define my career, it's just hundreds of people here and thousands across the country, is frustrating because you go back to June and we were all very optimistic and it seemed like the country was getting a better handle on the pandemic and college football would happen. And we operated that way for a while. The student athletes came back to campus for voluntary workouts. And it was remarkable to see that process and what our medical folks went through to make that happen for them. Then you get into July and the numbers just start to skyrocket nationally again, particularly in some college football hotbeds like Florida and Texas, and you start to get a little bit uneasy. You get to that portion of time that you were just referring to, Curt, where all of a sudden over the course of a weekend, it looked like all hope was dead. And you were hearing that from some very prominent reporters and some very prominent sources throughout the country. And I think we were all of the belief that if one of the Power Five conferences opted out of the fall portion of the calendar, they all would, because I could never have imagined a scenario where it would be a fractured Power Five and three would play and two wouldn't. And it's just been absolutely bizarre because even after the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 12 decided to press forward, there were all these hurdles, the biggest of which was students coming back to campus. And all the things that we worried would happen that I believe probably should have shut things down have happened. And they have just been persistent in pushing forward. So you open up Twitter or whatever social media you get your news on, and it's dire and it's bad. And this happened at UNC, and this happened at NC State, and this happened at Notre Dame. And then bang, our students come back a couple weeks ago and we're dealing with it now. And all of those things. Oh, when we get our opener postponed against NC State, and you're like, when is it going to be stopped? And it just hasn't been yet. So I think bizarre is the best way to describe it.
And the first game is September 19th, if the schedule's still current. And I suppose all these things as we get close have a little more potential fluidity, but it seems like it's going to happen. And what is happening then day to day with the players, with the staffs, to make sure that everything's on the up and up and that there will be a game and they know that everyone's there, or they can be confident that everyone's been tested and the virus is going to spread through the team?
Yeah, that's the issue right now. I think the fear has somewhat shifted from are we going to be able to play at all to are we going to be forced to play at much less than 100%? Because as I mentioned, the virus has arrived here in Blacksburg, which is just a small mountain college town, which was basically a very safe bubble, even while the country was experiencing a surge in cases. But when the students came back, the virus came with them, and our sports programs have certainly not been immune to that. And we've seen some case numbers rise, not just with football, but with other programs. And as the days tick away and we get closer to the 19th, that becomes the fear, because at this point, should anyone test positive, they're inside that 2-week window and they're not going to play. And that's definitely something that is literal right now with the Virginia Tech program as you're looking at your depth chart, because you're not just going into some soft non-conference opener. We're opening up for the first time since the 70s with Virginia, which in this area of the country is a massive deal. So I think it's for both programs, that fear of who are we going to arrive at game day with? Because again, it doesn't seem like it's going to get shut down. And if we do play with less than the best from either program, is there any point in doing it? And if we do, where's the integrity level of it?
And I know that the NFL begins soon and is beginning and is going to allow some fans in some places. I haven't read up on this, is the ACC allowing any states, any universities to have a certain number of fans, and what's going to happen in Blacksburg?
Yeah, that's another thing that's interesting. You've seen the same thing in the NFL, and that there's no baseline protocol that covers the entire league. I'm a bit surprised the NFL hasn't done that from a competitive balance standpoint, because with college football, and I suppose NFL would be in the same category, it's based upon what the restrictions are state to state. So in our case, for example, Clemson will allow 25% of fans, which is roughly 20,000 or so, 22,000, whereas the Virginia mandate right now is you cannot hold gatherings, whether they be outdoor or indoor, with more than 1,000 people. And you're talking about a 67,000 seat stadium here at Lane Stadium in Blacksburg, but you're also talking about that level of tickets basically only covers the parents, families, and friends of our players, and then the parents, family, and friends of the opposing team. So at this point, Virginia Tech has sold no tickets, but adding back to the bizarro world, Curt, it's week to week, right? Because at any point, Governor Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, could come out and say, hey, to heck with it. Now you can have 10,000, and then you scramble and try to sell tickets. And it's just a wait and see approach. There are a handful of teams, though, in the ACC that will attempt, and I use the word attempt on purpose, because I think that they're going to try it maybe once and then realize it's a horrific idea.
And the rosters are, I suppose, approaching 100 for the actual players on major college football teams, but the support staff, people like you, that you're super important. You need to be there in the realm of college football in today's world that we expect. But there's a lot of people that are normally there on game days that I suppose don't have to be. So how is that being managed?
Again, it's interesting. It's minute by minute. And yeah, you're right. Up until this year, I thought, you know what, we are essential personnel. We absolutely need to be there. But it's something we had to fight for, even though we're pretty distanced from the field. And basically, you can take a separate entrance, go straight to the booth, and not have to see anybody except your own crew if you don't want to. So our plan right now is that we are going to do all the games home and road. And in our modified ACC-only schedule, all the games for us on the road are drivable. So our crew will all drive their own vehicles, carpool lanes, be damned, and we'll show up and try to stay outside these plexiglass dividers. I know it all sounds a little bit absurd, but you're right. The fans have been deemed non-essential, of course, for Virginia Tech and all schools. Really, a big part of it is spirit. A big part of it is band. Here we have the great Corps of Cadets tradition, who are usually forming a tunnel on the field for our Enter Sandman entrance. That won't happen. Sideline reporters not being allowed, any non-essential personnel down on the field, and that, of course, includes sponsors and a lot of the ways that you make money aren't going to be there. In many ways, it's going to feel a lot like our fall scrimmages or our summer scrimmages, where it's just the team down on the field and we're by ourselves up in the booth monitoring it through binoculars. And honestly, a little more than a week out going into it, I don't know how that's going to feel. I don't know how it's going to affect our energy level and our crew's performance. I hope that my days going back to low A minor league baseball and broadcasting in empty stadiums will provide me some experience in that regard.
Yeah, that's just that thought bringing back times where it was definitely, you could definitely hear the broadcasters through the windows in some of these, like in the Northwoods League where I first met you. Like that's a thing that's going to be, I don't know how it's going to be managed. You're going to hear if there's 1,000 fans in the game, let's just say, that's when you can hear anyone that wants to be heard can be heard instead of it all drowning out. So the audio and how that's managed in the different facilities is something that I think will be quite fascinating.
Well, it's interesting. I was watching the BYU Navy game early in the first half when it was actually still a game last week, and BYU scored a touchdown, and ESPN, of course, has the effects mics on, and you start hearing hooting and hollering. And I turned to my wife and I said, "You know who's making that noise, don't you?" And she's like, "Who?" And I'm like, "It's the team," because they're the only ones in there. So you're right. And even in some of my minor league jobs, including the Northwoods League, I was in St. Cloud, we would always have a couple thousand fans. Alexandria, where you were, was usually pretty boisterous, and it was a little smaller, but there was still a ton of ambient noise. It's going to be odd for sure. And the biggest oddity of it all is the ACC is allowing stadiums to pipe in crowd noise, like you might have done at the Metrodome back in the day for Vikings games. But the lady who is running that is like, "What do you think I'm supposed to pipe in?" I'm like, "I don't know. Like, go look at La Liga and see what they do." So we might have an "Ole, ole, ole" chant rather than some of our usual cheerleader-led chants.
There's the old adage in broadcasting, or I suppose in media in general, no cheering in the press box. I'm wondering if that's going to be more or less, more encouraged or more strongly discouraged, knowing that you're going to be able to hear it for sure.
Well, the good thing about here is that our press box is a full 2 levels below where our radio booths are, and all the booths are self-enclosed. The bad news is that we have been barred from the actual press box, which is where the food is. So we can't even go down to our booths on level 7, which is the highest level, and the press box and where the TV box is and all that is on level 5. So we can't even set foot on that floor.
When's the last time you've been allowed to be around other people on campus?
Well, actually, what's interesting that too is we had an all ACC call within our company last week, and it was really interesting to hear some of the different restrictions and the levels of restrictions from school to school. I'm very fortunate here that I have very close relationships with both our men's basketball and our football coaches to the level that they trust me, despite the fact that we're not necessarily in the testing protocol. We've been tested, but just not as frequently as they are. And of course, you're doing the temperature scans and the list of questions and all those things. But as you can see here, this yellow bracelet is today's COVID approved bracelet. So I've actually been granted access to both facilities for years now. I've gone up and worked out kind of with the guys in the weight room. I know that's very surprising news to you because you knew me back when, but we've been allowed to do that for now. But again, it's always one moment away from somebody testing positive being shut down. So I generally do that at basketball in the morning, then go out to football practice. Of course, it's masks on for all of those things, but up to this point, I have been allowed to be around.
So you've bulked up in the off season is what you're telling me.
No, during the season. That goes back to when Buzz Williams was here. He was a fitness fanatic, and really the best way to gain respect and gain trust within him was to show him that you could be tough in the weight room and fight through some of those things. And he was big on the early morning workouts. And we have a strength coach here named David Jackson, who played for the Hokies back in the mid-'90s, who's become a really good friend of mine. And he strongly encouraged me to get involved in it. And it's just one of those things you become addicted to.
I think it's less relevant right now, but I'm still curious. You, as far as I understand, your main 2 play-by-play gigs are for the Virginia Tech football team and for the men's basketball team. And the men's basketball season was at the other end of the pandemic. The conference tournaments were going on. The NCAA tournament was about to happen, never did. Where did that all fall in for you and Virginia Tech in your season, what that was like back when things started to change?
Well, what was interesting for us, Curt, was we were down in Greensboro for the ACC tournament, and we had really struggled in Mike Young, the head coach now, his first year down the stretch, very young team, weren't going to make the NCAA tournament, probably weren't going to make the NIT either. Actually, I don't think we would have made the NIT. We got matched up with North Carolina on the second night of the ACC tournament, which was the Wednesday night, and lost, which ended our ACC tournament and would also end our season. So we woke up in Greensboro the next day, had breakfast as a team, and then left to come back to Virginia Tech, come back to Blacksburg. It's about a 3-hour drive. we got back here, and of course that was March 11th and into March 12th, where essentially the entire sports world shut down. So I was back in my apartment just ready to ease into the off season, do some things like come to Minnesota, go on other trips for some weddings and things that my wife and I were going to travel to. And all of a sudden, bang, 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 throughout the course of that week, everything shut down. And then into the next week, you started seeing those shelter in place orders. So we had actually finished our season. It tremendously affected some of our other spring sports like baseball. They never got their season off the ground. Softball was shuttered after a couple of games and all those things. So it did cancel some ACC network assignments for me. But in terms of football and basketball, we were done, which put our company in an odd predicament. They eventually furloughed all of the talent, as they call it, the broadcasters, across the country, which didn't sit all that well, honestly, with many of us, because we're kind of like school teachers. We're paid a 12-month salary, and all the work's over the course of 9 months. We had finished the work and didn't get paid for the summer.
So how did you spend your summer then?
Sitting right here in this stool, honestly, because again, all those trips got canceled. March and April was severe quarantine where we weren't leaving the house. We weren't seeing anybody. We were doing all the Zoom happy hours and all that stuff. And my wife and I were driving each other nuts here in our downtown apartment in Blacksburg. But, Virginia Tech pivoted quickly, which was very gratifying for me. They didn't really like the fact that the voice and face of their athletic department was furloughed, because I don't actually work for Virginia Tech. I work for a company called Learfield IMG College, which, of course, is the multimedia rights holder for Tech and hundreds of other schools. So they quickly stepped in and took care of me, as it were. They were creating interview opportunities and keeping me out front, and also keeping their programs out front. So they did an excellent job and basically wound up picking up my salary. So for about 2 or 3 months, we were just sitting here creating content. We were doing a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff with the coaches, trying to put together some 30 for 30 type documentaries, things like that. And then once the restrictions loosened a little bit and you could actually eat outside and the weather got nice here in Blacksburg, we started circulating again with some of our friends locally. Did make one trip back home to see my mom and my brother and sister for a few days over the 4th of July. I made a trip up to my wife's home in Philadelphia, saw her parents and some other members of her family. But basically, we've been here in Blacksburg more continuously than we ever are, because the off season is generally when you travel and get out of town.
In Blacksburg and in Virginia, I'm curious, you mentioned the students coming back on campus. How is Virginia handling schools at all different levels? Minnesota opened up here in the last couple of weeks. And with that, it seems like it's kind of school district by school district. Mostly, though, there's some distance learning involved and not everyone's in class every day. What's it like on campus, but also just in that part of the country? What are they doing?
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a hybrid model. Some places that have been hit a little harder, like Northern Virginia. What's interesting about Virginia is it's very diverse from north to south. It's very urban north, and you're running into Washington, D.C., that metroplex. And then when you get south, it's very rural. So I think Governor Northam has struggled quite a bit to mandate restrictions across the entirety of the state. So, for example, places like Richmond, they have not gone back in person. That's all online learning. Same in Northern Virginia. Here, it's a bit of a hybrid model. Just this week, some of the lower levels of the elementary ed have gotten back into the classroom a couple of days a week, not for as many hours as they normally would. And it's a hybrid between online and in person. And that's pretty uniform across most of the rural areas. Colleges, our students, like I said, came back, started some in-person class on August 24th. There is nothing that's exclusively in person. It's all hybrid. If you're in class one day a week, you'll be online the other two. Basically, it's about 30% in-person learning against 70% online. Some of their students are completely online. So it's a hodgepodge. I might not hesitate to call it a mess.
And I'd imagine you're able to avoid that whole education aspect, but you're still heavily involved at the university. And this university, I want to get into your broadcasting career. So with Virginia Tech, Blacksburg, as I think I mentioned, I have not been there, and it seems like one of those places in college sports and universities that's quite unique in the way that it's kind of set aside. I get the impression from almost everything else. Explain what it's like living there, being there. Let's try to forget the last few months where things have been totally different.
Yeah, it's very remote. It's very difficult to get to. I think that was on purpose back when they chose this location. It's mountainous. You'd come here if you were from Minnesota, where you and I are from, and be like, "Wow." You're driving up, and it's at an elevation of about 2,500 feet. When you're in the summer, spring, and fall months, it's just absolutely gorgeous here. The views are stunning. The sunsets are stunning. When I first moved here, it was July of 2015, and it was just absolutely gorgeous for about 6 weeks straight. And I'm like, this place is Pleasantville. Why didn't more people not know about this? And it's just one of those quaint movie set type places to go to college that I had never heard of until Michael Vick played here in 1999, like a lot of people. But the challenge is, if I want to get home or we want to go anywhere, you're driving at least an hour to Roanoke to that airport, and that's a regional airport. If you want to go to a major airport, it's 3.5 to Richmond. It's about 3 to Charlotte, and you're kind of located in a triangular position. But the thing that I've really come to love about it is, and it's not just because I'm a relatively public figure, as Coach Beamer has told me, John, you have a big job in a small place. So a lot of people know you. And when you're walking down the street, people are honking and they're waving and they're doing all those things. And like I said, I live right off campus. But what I've noticed is that's not independent to the public figures. That's just everybody. Everybody knows everybody, particularly when you live kind of around the campus boundary, which we do. It's awesome. We don't have kids, but when we do, or if people do, this is an idyllic place to raise them. It's just exceptionally safe, exceptionally remote, and beautiful.
So before I get more into some of the broadcasting stops I'm curious about, because we haven't chatted in several years, when you land a job like the one you have at Virginia Tech, and now you've been there, it sounds like about 5 years, what would keep you from being there forever? It seems like one of those jobs that once someone gets, and if they still like you and you like it, you might never take another broadcasting job that doesn't at least keep you there.
That is the interesting thing, and I think it's personal ambition or what you prefer that would be the only thing that would take you out of it, because you're right, and this business, how difficult some of these national type jobs or MLB or NFL jobs are to obtain. They're once in a lifetime. A lot of it's luck, a lot of it's who you know, of course, and a lot of it's where you happen to be. And what I've said ever since I've been here, not that I've really done a whole lot of looking around in terms of where we might go, is that it would take an awfully awesome opportunity to get us to leave here, because you get to do high-level football. You get to do high-level basketball. I contend that there's nothing more exciting than ACC basketball. I mean, I absolutely love it. I don't think I would even be drawn out by an NBA job at this point, because then you drop football and maybe you're not with a team that even has a chance to compete. It's not quite as attractive for us, and I can only answer for me, because the guy, Bill Roth, who was here before me, was here for 27 years, left for a year, and then is back as a professor here on campus because he missed it so much. And he moved actually to UCLA, which would be considered higher profile, but just hated it because, the people weren't as invested and it was not nearly the feel that it was here. For us, though, my wife, like I mentioned, is from Philadelphia. I'm originally from Chicago and grew up primarily in the suburbs of Minneapolis. We've always considered ourselves more urban people. So all of the quaint niceties that I just mentioned about rural life can be a little slow, can be a little boring for us at times. But as I get older, some of that, living in a high rise in New York City doesn't seem quite as attractive. And as the years tick by, the reasons for leaving become less and less.
So let's chat more about your overall broadcasting career. And I've gotten into this a little bit on the podcast before, but I don't really talk about my old broadcasting career. I think the time and the place where I got to maybe know you the best it was the Winter Meetings 2006. We were in Orlando, Florida, on the at Disney for the Major League Baseball Winter Meetings and Minor League Baseball. We were both pursuing jobs. That was the first time I'd ever gone to one of those. And I guess this is one of the angles I want you to kind of take your response to what I say is that was when I realized I never pursued or really had a mentor at a high level in broadcasting. So at that time, even though you're just a few years older than me, you had been around a lot more people that I would imagine were more like mentors to you. So you became somewhat of a mentor towards me, realizing what I need to do if I want to really make it in that career. And not long after that, I got out of broadcasting. And
sounds a great mentor.
well, no, actually, but what was interesting, I used to look back at my life and think, if I would have stayed in broadcasting, how would it have been different? If I recall this correctly, it was one of the jobs you ended up getting with the Altoona Curve in Pennsylvania, being the number 2 broadcaster, working under a more experienced broadcaster for a AA baseball team. You got that job. I was a finalist. It might have been you and I as the finalists. They chose you. Your resume was better. Your tape might have been better, probably was better. And they went with you. And I used to think, what if I would have gone there? Where would I be right now? So I don't think about that anymore. I guess I decided I'm pretty much, I've been okay for many years not being in broadcasting. I don't know that my passion was for it, maybe the way that it is for you. But tell me about that almost 10-year stretch from when you got that job and I didn't, and where that ended up taking you before you ended up at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember those 2006 winter meetings. I think I might have been the one that suggested to you to go, because to me, that event was, if you were serious about baseball, you just absolutely had to be there. The year before that, I had been in Yakima, Washington, with the low A short season affiliate of the Diamondbacks, and I had gotten that job at the winter meetings 05, which was in Dallas. So 06, I knew I had that job that I could go back to if I wanted. The job that I actually wanted at the 06 winter meetings was the Potomac Nationals job, which was a full season. It was high A in the Carolina League. It was a dumpy stadium and not a good organization, but at the time, all we were looking for was reps on the air. And one of those things, sometimes blessings are unanswered prayers. As it goes, that's what it turned out to be, because the job that I got in Altoona working under Jason Dombach happened to be with one of the better run organizations in all of minor league baseball. Just a beautiful stadium in Altoona, Pennsylvania. It's the only redeeming thing that Altoona, Pennsylvania can boast. I hated living there. But out of that, I worked for Todd Parnell, who is just an absolute icon in minor league baseball. So fast forward, we get through the 2007 season. Like you said, I'm the number 2 announcer, just kind of doing the middle innings and not traveling and living in Altoona. Jason becomes one of my best friends. I get tight with Todd Parnell, which was difficult to do, particularly at a lower level position, just because it was a guy that knew everybody and everything. Well, that organization was owned by a guy named Chuck Greenberg, who was most famous for saving Pittsburgh Penguins hockey in Pittsburgh when they were trying to relocate that team. He formed a group with Mario Lemieux and Jerome Bettis and saved the Pittsburgh Penguins. So then he convinced those guys to invest in a trio of minor league teams: Altoona, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and also in State College, Pennsylvania, which is where Penn State was. So after the season, fortuitously enough, the broadcaster in Myrtle Beach leaves, and they immediately just called me. I was back in Minneapolis, and they said, get down to Myrtle Beach. You've got a week, and that's your job. So I go down to Myrtle Beach. I do that in the 2008 season, wind up from there getting the job at Charleston Southern to do their football and basketball, and I'm doing both. And then I wind up moving up to AA with Montgomery out of the organization. I'm there for 1 year. You got to stay with me in 2009. And then Todd Parnell left Altoona, fractured off from the Greenberg Group to bring baseball back to Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of Virginia. Huge deal, went into a AAA stadium, turned into this awesome opportunity to be part of the founding team or founding group of that team. I wouldn't have been able to, though, had I stayed in Myrtle Beach, because I would have had a non-compete and couldn't have gone with him away from the Greenberg organization. So I wind up in Richmond. I'm there. I catch a lucky break because I hired the entire press box staff from VCU, which nobody had heard of at the time, under a young coach named Shaka Smart. They make the Final Four in 2011. Walking out of the baseball press box one day, their SID said, hey, you want to do our women's basketball for us? And I said, sure, I'm not doing anything in the offseason anyway. I wind up doing that. They like me. They go to the Final Four. Their profile just skyrockets, and now they need every game on TV. Well, there's not a whole lot of play-by-play guys in Richmond, Virginia. I wind up doing that along with the Flying Squirrels. It was the Richmond team, the Giants affiliate, and get to know just everybody in the college space in Virginia. And then in 2015, when this job opens up, I had the right connections to surprise a lot of people and get this job. So it's amazing. All of it goes back to getting that job in Altoona at the 06 winter meetings in between Bud Lights, which we were enjoying heavily.
It's good news that Potomac they went with someone else, and that's so funny as we look back at our lives and how things change, that you can look to that moment as one of the biggest ones for you where you're at right now.
Well, what's interesting also, too, is that the guy they hired in Potomac was a guy by the name of Anthony Opperman. He's from Texas. So he goes there, and well, like I said, it was a pretty crappy operation in a bad ballpark. He gets fed up with it. So he goes and works in Reading, Pennsylvania, kind of in a secondary role with the Reading Phillies, which is our iconic with an iconic organization run by a guy by the name of Chuck Domino, who was the mentor to Parney, who was my boss. So Domino joins forces with Parney. That's why he left to start the Richmond franchise. So the guy who beat me out for Potomac wound up becoming my number 2 in Richmond, and we wound up being close friends. In fact, he was just here at my apartment a couple of weeks ago. We were drinking wine and telling a lot of the same stories.
Oh, that's awesome. The way it all ties together. So I guess what I want from you now for the next young version of me or young version of you that wants to get into this, and I'm sure you run into these people and people are reaching out to you that are trying to break into sports broadcasting. What have you boiled it down to, the biggest and best advice to someone that's wanting to end up somewhere near where you're at or beyond?
Well, what I tell all of our students, and our communications program here at Virginia Tech has really blossomed because, like I said, Bill Roth, who's a legend of the business, has come back, and he's a Syracuse grad. And he's attempting to basically emulate that model here and get game experience for these kids. So they come to me a lot and ask me that. What I always tell them is you have to be willing to not say no, even to things that you know you don't like, because you need to figure out what you do like and what you don't like. And they always respond with, well, what does that mean? I want to be a writer. Or I want to be on air. Or I want to do this, blah, 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 like we all wanted to. And I said, well, I was very fortunate and didn't even realize it at the time because, as you remember, I got an internship at KFan, which at the time was not the fan radio network, was not the juggernaut that it is now. It was just a bunch of really young and ambitious people. Your Paul Allens were in their 30s. Jeff Dubé was still there. Chad Hartman was still, I believe, in his early 40s. Dan Barrero wasn't where he is now. I won't reveal his age for those that don't know. And it was just an awesome time to be there because it was about to take off, but it was also not established enough yet where they didn't give opportunities to people like me who had no business getting them. So I wound up in all the clubhouses and locker rooms, the T-Wolves, the Vikings, the Gophers, the Twins, on and on it went, to all these different events, and stumbled and learned what I didn't like to do. I didn't want to be a beat reporter. I didn't want to be the guy that gathered sound. I knew I didn't want to be behind the microphone doing producing and answering calls because I had done all of those things. So that was the greatest transformational thing in my career. And I'm still close with all those guys because it was a special time. And not surprisingly, it hasn't turned over all that much. Corey Cove, who's a huge morning star now, Sludge on KFan, him and I started interning the same day and used to be competitive with each other. Justin Guard, I trained him as an intern, and now he's Dan Barrero's sidekick, has 3 kids, and is crushing it in Minneapolis. Brandon Molesky, same thing with the Common Man. He was our intern coordinator when I was there and wasn't yet the producer for the Common Man. But I found out so many things that I didn't want to do, and that's ultimately what led me to the Northwoods League, is because I discovered through all of that I wanted to be Chad Hartman. I wanted to do play-by-play, and there just wasn't any in Minneapolis. And I realized the second piece of advice that I always give people, regardless of where you want to wind back up, which for me at the time was Minneapolis, you have to be willing to go to where the opportunities are, because regardless of how good or talented you think you might be, and believe me, I was quite cocky back then. You remember that, I'm sure, too. There was a ton of talent throughout. I didn't even know that Syracuse had this phenomenal broadcasting school, because when I was going to college, I wasn't all that interested in anything other than partying and girls. So I had to learn those secondarily, and I had to learn it by moving to Yakima, Washington. If you've never heard of it, you're probably not alone. Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is in the middle of nowhere, Montgomery, Alabama, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Richmond, and now to here. And it's because I never said no to an opportunity that I knew would help me, even if I knew that I probably wouldn't enjoy living there.
You mentioned something briefly. How involved are you with the education process for multimedia people, journalists, broadcasts on campus? Do you have a role there?
Yeah, what's cool about it, with the advent of the ACC network came the advent of the ACC Network Extra, which is, I wish, Curt, that they had these opportunities when we were younger and getting into this industry, because there's just so much more opportunity for the students now. Because what the ACC Network Extra broadcasts are is basically a student-driven production but that is meant to mimic the quality of ESPN. And it's essentially around our Olympic sports. So you're talking about volleyball, both our men's and women's soccer, lacrosse, women's basketball. They do a lot of those broadcasts, baseball. So the chances for reps and the chances to get involved with the entire process is nothing like it was when we were at that time, we were at that age in college. And the control rooms are state of the art because they built them for the ACC network. They need to be capable of handling a linear broadcast, even at a football level, which we'll have to do this fall because no one's traveling in COVID. So to answer your question, yeah, I coordinate our intern program, which goes back and forth. So we have some students who are capable of providing on-air commentary, being play-by-play, being sideline reporters. Might be a game that I'm doing play-by-play, and it might be a student that's the sideline reporter. And we've got a couple stars, just like every school does, who are going to have big careers. And then we've got some other ones that with reps are going to get to that point where they might be network capable. So it's a lot of fun to see them grow. It's a lot of fun to work with them. They're a lot less bitter and more enthusiastic than you get after 20 to 20 some years in this profession. And in terms of the in-classroom stuff, I don't teach a class necessarily, just don't have time for that, but I do oftentimes guest lecture in our comm department just for maybe once or twice a semester. And it's a really rewarding, honestly, to be around the young people.
Do you have any issue filling the time in that lecture opportunity when it arises?
No, what I generally do, man, is I just go in, give a little background, say some of the things that I've said to you, and just open it up to questions. And what I love is they have so many, and they're questions that I wouldn't even have thought of back then, you know, in terms of their own path. They're so much more focused and know what they want to do than I was at that age. It causes me to look back at my own career, even though I deem it to be pretty successful, and wonder if I could have avoided some of the missteps that I made.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned back when we were in college, and where did you go, remind me?
Arizona State.
Okay, which has a very well-known journalism program as far as I understand. I went to St. Cloud State, which I think is also highly regarded. And I know now they are advanced in some of the ways that you're describing. Even back when I was there, they had Husky Productions, and they still do, where all of the St. Cloud State men's hockey games were produced at a high level, and the students were very involved in that. I wasn't actually involved with that. I was more with the KVSC on the radio side, but I know now most of the sports at St. Cloud State, their students, I saw recently, it was an all-female production team, like 20 women doing I don't know if it was a volleyball game or some sort of maybe basketball game this winter. So I really think the opportunities are just well beyond what we had. But for you and I think we had to have the motivation to kind of create our own.
Yeah, you did. Real quick, though, Curt, I want to circle back because what's also been cool, you mentioned St. Cloud State, and St. Cloud was, of course, where I had my first play-by-play opportunity with the Riverbats, now the Rocks. And what I've created here is, like I mentioned, we have a star. His name's Evan Hughes, and anybody who watches this in St. Cloud will know that name because what we've done is establish a pipeline from Virginia Tech, much like they used to have with the baseball programs to the Northwoods leagues, where I've been funneling announcers to Scott Schreiner, who's now the owner of the St. Cloud Rocks, was the general manager back there. So it's been a joy that essentially I got him his first job up there with Scott, and then Mark Jerzak and Ryan Vaz, of course, who you know. Now Vaz, I guess, is the president of the Northwoods League as of yesterday. They're running Wilmer, so we put one of our guys up on their radar, and he wound up in the Northwoods League. But Evan's been in the league now for 3 years, and I happened to be home, and I was going through Rocori or Cold Spring to say hello to my old analyst on Rocori football. And I think I tweeted about it or something, and I got a call from Shrinetown, as I call him, and he's like, "Lays, you're in central Minnesota. Like, you got to come by our game tomorrow, blah, blah, blah." So I did throw out a first pitch, which was embarrassing. I spiked it short of the plate. But I got to meet Kirsten Kroll, who I think is who you're referring to. They did that all-female broadcast at St. Cloud State, and they were doing Northwoods League TV. And it was just insane, man. Things that we wouldn't have even hypothesized about back in the day. It was really cool.
And the opportunities are out there. And even, I mean, this is my podcast. I created it. I kind of do what I want with it. But I think the opportunity for people to just create whatever they want is so different now that if you're good at it and you persevere, people will notice you and you'll start getting more and more opportunities. And I guess one thing I might have lacked is some clarity within my motivation back then. And I think I got pretty good by the time I gave it up, but I just didn't have enough direction along the way to really continue to pursue it. And I got into the different gig in sports with the Northwoods League, as I probably have talked about, and just kind of got away from sports overall. I'm still a big fan of sports, not to the level I used to be. Do you find yourself having the time to really care about sports in general the way that you once did?
I'm still a huge Vikings fan. That's really the only fandom that I've still allowed me. But I think, Curt, that your story is one that's shared by a lot of people, because that's another thing that I've told people and I've noticed is that working in sports is essentially a war of attrition. Can you do it financially? You know, in my case, I was exceptionally fortunate to have a family that just funneled money in. We weren't rich, but they had enough where they could pay half my rent in Altoona, because I was basically working at a loss for that entire season. You know, didn't honestly make anything close to a respectable salary until like my third year in Richmond, at which time I was 33, 34 years old. So it becomes hard to make it. And you know, along the way, you realize, hey, I have these skills that I'm very certain I could be successful in other areas that would be more lucrative, might be more enjoyable, might allow me to actually meet a woman and get married and have children and have some balance and satisfaction. And to be honest with you, there was a moment in 2014 where I'm just like, you know what, I'm done with this. I've been in AA for 5 years. I'm not going to make it to the major leagues. I've wasted time in terms of gaining support in the other sports, football, basketball, what have you, and really pondered for the only time in my career getting out of it. And then bang, out of nowhere comes this Virginia Tech opportunity. I'm not sure what the point of that story is, except to say that there are a lot of people that I think are that way, that have found tremendous joy and fulfillment out of sports, and probably still get more joy from sports from not having worked in it. Baseball is a prime example for me. I grew up a Cubs fan, you know, diehard, Ryan Sandberg, Mark Grace, Andre Dawson, those teams of the mid to late 80s and early 90s, you know, those were my guys. And then I worked with the San Francisco Giants organization for 6 years. And when they met in the playoffs, you know, more than half of the roster for the Giants were my personal friends, my golfing buddies, my drinking partners, you know, our bus mates, all of those things. And I'm watching on TV, and I was realizing that I was absolutely pulling for the Giants to beat my Cubs. And I realized I was no longer a fan. I was an employee.
Yeah, that's something I definitely realized as I got very close. And I was used to be much closer with the sport broadcasting. And then as I got away from broadcasting and more of an administrative role, my care about sports changed, because I no longer was as personally invested with individuals. And that's that I realized, once you're really a part of the team in the middle of it and really caring about the people on the team at a different level, when you no longer care about the people on the team in the same way with some other, like say the Timberwolves is a team I barely really follow at this point. I notice a difference in my fandom. Like, I'm not attached to them. They don't excite me enough. I just can't invest any time into them. Yeah, I'm still a big Vikings fan, and I don't really watch the Twins, but I follow them. But that's mostly the extent of it for me, years out of working in sports.
Well, that's the thing. You know, I say I'm a passionate Vikings fan. That's not really true. I mean, if they lose now, it doesn't ruin my week. It doesn't even ruin my Sunday in most cases. But I watch all the games. My wife is an absolute diehard Eagles fan. Let's see if I can turn this the right way. You can see she forced me to post the newspaper cover from when they won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, which happened to be our wedding year, which is another good story because they, of course, demolished the Vikings in the NFC Championship game. But yeah, you know, it's like anything, you know, if you love the Mall of America, I remember I used to love the Mall of America. Right. And then, I worked at a kiosk in the Mall of America, and it just ruined it for me. I didn't want to go back to the Mall of America ever again. And it wasn't anything the mall had done or changed. It was because I had. And what's fun is in minor league baseball, it's not so much that you don't care about the players. You do individually. It's just not as important to win. The Northwoods League was awesome because there was just so much rivalry and so much competition, even amongst the front office people. You know, Ryan Voss, Scott Schreiner, Mark Jerzak, they're all obviously great friends, but St. Cloud and Alexandria were huge rivals. That got stale through my years in minor league baseball. You really didn't care if you won. It was all about player development and guys moving up and moving on. So coming now to Virginia Tech has really instilled that back in me, because the Gophers were not any good, honestly, all the years that I lived in Minnesota. And now they have a little bit. under PJ, but I didn't have that college fire in me in terms of that. And they have that here, man. When football loses, it's depression in town for the entire week, and hundreds of thousands of people care. Basketball is not quite on that level of interest, but it's still very high. So now you have the hair on your arms standing up in the deep moments of the games, not just because you want to win and you know the coaches and they're your friends and all those things, because it affects your life. If we win, my life's better. If we lose, it's not. And I don't think there's any greater level of investment that you can have than that.
That's definitely something growing up in Minnesota with the Gophers being the only Division I team and it just not having that feel through the years in the Metrodome and maybe the years before that it's really, I think, much more challenging as a sports fan to be a college football fan growing up in Minnesota than it might be growing up in these other places in the country. And now you're experiencing that working and living in Blacksburg.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely different. And my dad went to Iowa, so we cheered for Iowa, and that gave us a little bit, but it just didn't have a sense of it. And I'm sure SEC fans say the same thing about the ACC schools in Virginia Tech, but that's all part of the fun.
A couple of things that you mentioned that I want to go back to briefly and then move forward. You mentioned Ryan Voss. He was on the most recent episode of my podcast talking about his Wilmer Stingers, and they had fans at their stadium amidst the pandemic, and that was an interesting conversation with him. But also just the news that you shared with him. I haven't seen that yet, but he's now president of the Northwoods League. So that's happened since that conversation with me for my most recent episode of People I Know show. But the other thing I want to chat about, John, you mentioned one of the most disappointing Vikings games in recent years was that Vikings-Eagles game. And this will take it a little more personal first on my end and on yours if you're willing to share. But for the last 3+ years, but definitely the last 3 years, I'd watched almost every Vikings game with my uncle at his apartment in Bloomington. And unfortunately, sadly, he passed away about a couple of weeks ago. And he's a man, Mark Dreher, that he was in a wheelchair for over 40 years and still had as much fun with him as I ever did with anyone. And I found so much joy, again, being a Vikings fan the last few years, especially watching the games with him. We'd sit there all day. I'd be monitoring my fantasy football, flipping back and forth. Every time the Vikings game went to commercial, I went to the Red Zone channel for 2 minutes and I set my timer and I turned it back to the Vikings. It was perfect. We had such a good time. And I'm starting to get over, I guess, the loss, the sadness, the crying. I went through that stage, but that's a big part of my life, I'm realizing, as we enter football season. Like, I'm not going to go to his place anymore and watch the games. I've got to kind of change things in my life. And I'm thinking back to the last time that I reached out really to have you on my podcast. You agreed to be on. And then I know that your dad wasn't doing well and you lost him about a year ago. So if you're willing to share, what's the last year been like and how close were you with your dad? And, just it kind of describe that from a personal level.
First, condolences, obviously, on your uncle. I saw your post about that, and I thought what you wrote was remarkable about his life and your relationship with him. I thought that was awesome, and, a tremendous loss, obviously, for you. So really sorry to hear that as you go into this football season, too. It was hard, man. My dad was he was my best friend. And I lost him the morning of a game, actually, a football game here. He was in the Mayo Clinic, and we didn't really think that he was at the end of his life. He clearly wasn't doing well. He was dealing with multiple myeloma and had been misdiagnosed in terms of how quickly it was overtaking him. And he was actually trying to make his way to a T-cell trial, which we thought was going to be the silver bullet type cure for what he had. So we were in a very hopeful place, and the bottom kind of dropped out of it very quickly. So for 4 weeks, and to describe what football season is like in my business, it is just all consuming. You get up at 6:30 in the morning and you're going all day just to get things ready. My crew is 8 people, and you're dealing with logistics and travel and, getting your cards ready and being at practice and hosting coaches shows and all of those things. So I was going back and forth between Rochester and here and getting the games done. And, my dad took a real turn for the worse. It was actually at the end of September, Duke week here, and I was up there. I missed the coaches show 3 weeks in a row and was there Monday through Wednesday and flew back here Wednesday night. And, as I was talking about earlier, it's not easy to get here. It's a whole day of travel. And Rochester's not easy to get to either, obviously, because you're kind of flying connections both ways and then driving a couple of hours on both ends. So it was getting pretty exhausting, and I had to come back here. And, on my last conversation with him, I started to realize the severity of it and that this might be the last time. I was planning on coming back in a Friday night game against Duke, and I was going to fly back Saturday and just be there again, kind of repeat the cycle of the week. But when I talked to him on Wednesday, I got the feeling that might be the last time. And I said, Dad, should I stay? And he said, no, call the game, because he loves sports. So I came back, and I knew that he had passed away at about 2 a.m. on Friday. And I didn't tell anybody except my wife, because I knew, there's just, you run into thousands of people on game day, and it's festive and all of these things. And we just got absolutely stomped that night. I think we were 2 touchdown favorites. We lost 45-10. The sky's falling in Blacksburg. We should fire our head coach. The staff's got to go. All those things that come with big-time college football. I was obviously proud of myself that I got through the broadcast. It's about a 6-hour on-air endeavor and everything that goes with it. But I was equally proud of the relationships I had here, how supportive people were, to the point that I hadn't told him, obviously, before the game, but when we did our post-game coaches interview, our head coach, Justin Fuente, got up. I said, hey, we lost him. And he's like, I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but he said, shit, I'm sorry, man. He goes, hopefully he gets up to heaven quick, because we're going to need his fucking help, because we just got absolutely demolished. And sure enough, we went down to Miami the next week and won. But it's been tough because, to your point, like I said, he died at 69 years of age, which is too young. Obviously, it's not kind of in the tragic category where he was alive until I was 40, and I feel fortunate for that. But it's reshaped my thinking on a lot of things, because you don't realize how much of your career and your life is attempting to make your father proud, even though we were so tight and I always knew he was proud. Now I have to find other inner motivation to drive myself forward, I guess.
Thank you for sharing that, Jon. I know I put you on the spot a little bit, but we all go through different levels of this. And something I realize is I really want to live a long, full life, exciting. I travel a bunch, as you see the part of the map over my shoulder here. I want to see every continent in the world and basically every country in the world that I don't put myself in danger. Like, I want to do these things. And if I live a life like that and live a long time, the people I care about most, so many of them might go before me. And it's something that I think culturally we don't really talk about it or ask people about it after a certain point. But I know I've been going through quite a bit lately, and now dealing, like, I'm the one going to my uncle's apartment because I'm close and just trying to get rid of things and give things away. And it's like, this isn't a part of it. I guess I signed up for this by being very close with him. But this is something that this is something I might have to do again, and with other people that are very important to me. I don't even want to think about it, but it's a reality. So I just appreciate you sharing that about you and your dad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, tremendously sorry you're going through that. I think, to your point, that is a reality that maybe you can distance from, particularly in my career, where it's just game after game after game in baseball and different city after different city. And, for a lot of years, I didn't really notice that my parents were aging all that much. They were still the age they were in 2006 when I set out to Altoona. So, on the other side of it, it's really taught me to be more appreciative of my siblings, of my mom, obviously, who's truly the rock of the family. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated my grandmother's 100th birthday on the other end of the spectrum. So there is some joy to be found. But Curt, I got to circle back to a happy story about my dad that involved that Vikings-Eagles game we were just talking about. So, like I said, that was occurring in January, I guess it was, of 2018. My wife and I were set to get married in May of 2018 in Washington, D.C. And the reason that we were going to get married in D.C. was my dad was a religious man, led a ministry in Minneapolis based around addiction, but had created tremendous relationships within the Catholic Church. He's not Catholic. I'm not Catholic, but my wife is Catholic, and her family is extremely devout in their Catholicism. So we wanted to do a Catholic mass, and we wanted to get married in a cathedral. which is not all of that easy when one of the people getting married is not Catholic. They don't do that very easily. But my dad used his connections. We actually got the Cathedral of St. Matthew the Apostle in downtown D.C., which is where JFK was actually buried. It's just this huge, massive cathedral, which certainly impressed the wife's family. She loved it. It was her dream place as a Catholic to get married, and it was because my dad had set it up, and he actually did a portion of the service, even though he wasn't Catholic, and it was a thrill of his lifetime. But so the Eagles game back in January, Vikings, Eagles playing in the NFC Championship game, is on the road for the Vikings. But as you remember, they were favored because Philly didn't have Carson Wentz. They had Nick Foles in at quarterback. So my wife and I gambled the entrance song to our reception. If the Vikings won, it was going to be Skull Vikings, and she thought she would be disowned from her family. And, of course, if the Eagles won, it was going to be Fly, Eagles, Fly, and all my Minnesota friends would never talk to me again. So right before kickoff, she's like, no, call it off. I don't want to do it. Call it off. I don't want to do it. And I was like, whatever. So we agreed to call it off. The Eagles win. And so I'm just like, you know what, I'm going to fulfill this. But like I said, my first job was interning for Paul Allen, PA and Dubé show at KFan. So I texted PA, who I still keep in contact with. And I was like, hey, man, if I write a script for the entrance to our reception, would you voice it over and send it back? He responds, sure, Johnny, no problem. Just that's easy for him. But my sideline reporter here, a good friend of mine from Richmond, is from Philly. And his first gig was interning for Merrill Reese, who's the voice of the Eagles, now almost approaching his 50th year, just an icon in that area. So unbeknownst to anybody, I flipped the script. I didn't tell anybody except my wife that I was going to have PA introduce the wedding party, the bridal party. All the bridesmaids, all the groomsmen come in, and her Philly folks are like, yeah, that's kind of cute. They got the voice of the Vikings, whatever. And then right at the point where they were going to announce us, I had PA turn it over to Merrill Reese, and he comes on, and the room just explodes, and he introduces my wife and I coming in. But the funny thing is I come in and I see my dad's eyes, and he claims to be a Vikings fan and all these things. And he's just so proud of what he's accomplished to this day, getting this wedding done, that he couldn't have been more enthusiastically fist pumping to Fly, Eagles, Fly. He would have thought he was the biggest Eagles fan in the world. So we shared sports is my point. And that was one of the last really good days we had.
That is such a great memory and another great story. I know from being a broadcaster so many years, having great stories and different stories to share is so much what you need to do, especially in baseball, maybe less with all this going on with the big-time college football broadcasts, but you do very well at sharing stories. So all the years of minor league baseball, play-by-play, when you were by yourself, has really paid off for you, John.
I appreciate it. You know what that's like, man. Just sitting in what feels like a closet talking to yourself. I'll tell you, though, one of my favorite stories ever, still to this day, and I still say, by the way, those 2 years I spent in the Northwoods League were probably the happiest summers I've ever spent. There was just such an innocence to it. All the guys were not tarnished by years in the minor leagues, and it was all young people working in it. It was in that bunker press box in Alexandria, and you'll remember this. It was in 2003. And Thomas Diamond throws what is about to be a no-hitter, and I can't remember who off Alexandria, hits the little dribbler past the mound, short of second base. I think it was Matt Fornacier was playing second base, comes up, picks it up barehand, off balance, throws a little wide of the bag. Your elderly official scorer rules it a hit, which I, to this day, contend that it was. I thought it was a hit, and that's the way it should have been scored. That was with 2 outs in the ninth. Diamond strikes out the next guy. He comes down to do the post-game interview in that cage, the press box in Alexandria. And I'm like, hey, TD, tremendous performance. You don't get the no-hitter, but one-hit shutout, continue to dominate. And he's like, oh, no, they just changed it to a no-hitter. And I look out the scoreboard. I'm like, sure enough, they did. What happened? And you'll remember that our owner, Joel Sutherland, came down and was like on the verge of throwing blows with the official scorekeeper to get him to change it. And I'm just like, man, the sports are intense. But like I said, I got to circle back to Ryan Vaz, by the way,
okay,
because I love Vaz. But yeah, so Evan Hughes, who I was mentioning, is now the voice of the Rocks, has been for the last 3 years. He sent me the release yesterday, which said Vaz was now the president of Northwoods League. But what couldn't escape me is the fact that the picture of Vaz he's just absolutely jacked. Like, that guy's been hitting the gym for the last 10 years, because I don't want to say anything negative about his physique, but he was a little bit chubby back in 2003. He looks like a damn model right now.
He looks great. Yeah, he and Mark Jerzak at a certain point many years ago decided to focus on their health more. And I've had Ryan on my podcast twice, and that was one of I ended with a segment called the personal growth segment. So get that thought to your mind. We're going to do that in just a matter of a minute or two. And that was, I think, what he talked about the first time he was on my podcast, the fact that he was, he carried a lot more pounds than he probably needed to all those years in the Northwoods League. And he changed his life and got a lot healthier and still looks great today compared to, I know, what he was probably the time when we were both in that press box in Alexandria. And just, I hadn't thought about that. I definitely remember that. I also thought it was a hit. It was kind of embarrassing. And that press box, I don't know if you've ever been in a press box where the visiting broadcaster and the home broadcaster are seated closer to each other. So that's where we first got to know each other, sitting right next to each other, basically having our own broadcast in Alexandria.
Yep. And that ballpark faces the wrong way into the setting sun. And I just remember there was one where somebody popped it up and nobody knew where it went. Nobody on the field. I couldn't see it. You couldn't see it. And the umpires were like, well, I guess it's foul. But I loved it, man. I love the mascot stomping on top of the dugouts and the press box. And, that's part of the thing that you take forward as a broadcaster. We didn't realize it at the time. We were just happy to be on the air and happy to have the microphone that we did. That's a daunting thing, to sit next to somebody else and call the game while they're also calling a different game. And there's people milling about and the scorekeeper. And that wasn't independent to Alexandria. Rochester was the same way. And most high school press boxes are that way when you're doing football. And I would do basketball from the high school stands where you've just got like this little plank table and people are, you know what I mean? So once you actually get to like a Posh and Tony booth, you're just like, well, this is remarkably easy. I can handle this. We got a fridge with waters and Diet Cokes and away we go. So, we came up hard, I guess, but we came up fun, man. It was, I wouldn't trade those years for anything.
Those are some great memories. I do not think about them very often, so thank you.
You can't. yeah, you can't, because what we pulled off in terms of sleep back then, I think would kill me now.
I mentioned the personal growth segment. I want to close the conversation with that. I know you've talked on a bunch from what you're dealing with right now in COVID, things to your broadcasting career, and some personal stories about your dad. Maybe there's something tied into that, but maybe something you haven't talked about at all. When I mentioned your own personal growth, something that you've been doing, working on, being better at, something that you're willing to share that you think maybe someone listening right now or watching right now might be able to take this in and improve their life based on what you've learned about your own life.
Well, I'll tell you something that's just occurred over the last few months, and that has been the movement for racial equality throughout our country. And obviously that hit close to home and should for everybody, but particularly for those of us from Minnesota because of what happened to George Floyd on the streets of Minneapolis. And that's a street that I've been on. My best friend from high school lives about a half a mile from there to see our city in flames, but also recognize the justification behind it. Just really opened my eyes to the fact that I work around some of the most talented and intelligent and gifted African-American Black people in the country, in the world. And, I'm friends with them and we enjoy each other's company and we enjoy professional successes together. But I really had never done a whole lot to learn about what their lives were like. Let's say whether they came from Georgia or they came from Louisiana. I'm just using a couple of guys off our basketball team as an example. Two of our assistant coaches from basketball are Black. They also happen to be two of my best friends. So I just wanted to start a dialogue with them, not because I necessarily felt guilty, but just because I recognized with my platform there's so much more that I could do. And they were obviously enthusiastic about that. And we live in an area here that is decidedly rural, not exactly progressive in terms of their thinking on a lot of these topics. And they said, well, Lays, if you do some of this stuff, like, isn't that going to negatively come back to you? And I was like, potentially, but not necessarily by people that I'm going to really care about their opinion or worry too much whether they respect me, because it's important. So anyway, we've decided to do a number of initiatives here at Virginia Tech. move things forward. I've been very vocal on social media about what I think needs to happen at Tech and nationally. And, I'm not sitting here saying that it's something that I've been driving the bus on for years. It hasn't been. It's been weeks. It's been months, but it's been very rewarding. And I encourage everyone, as we now say, to be an ally, because you'd be amazed at how much you can change, even if you don't have necessarily as large a platform as a sports network.
I appreciate you sharing that. I know for years I've been going through my own version of that understanding of, my life has been easy in a lot of ways, and some of them, many of them, I feel like are because I don't have any additional challenges because I'm a white guy and things just seem pretty easy when I get stopped by a cop, which happens occasionally. Almost every time they leave me just with no issue, no ticket, nothing, just with a warning. And I wonder, like, would that really happen if I was somebody else? And I don't, not every time. I don't think it would have. And so I've been having some people on my podcast that can better talk about that than even you and I can. But I know with whatever platforms we have and continue to have, it's important for anyone that's an ally to share what we can and really put people that haven't quite understood what we're beginning to understand better and better in position to just learn more, because it's all about education.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Take the first step, and the following steps I've discovered become easier and easier and filled with more people in your life, which is amazing. Honestly, it's been very rewarding.
Jon Laaser, I appreciate you being on People I Know show. You're someone that I guess we spent a lot of time in close quarters years ago, and I haven't been too much in touch with you over the recent years, but I really appreciate having this conversation with you and you sharing what you have from your life.
That was awesome, Curt. Great to catch up with you, man. It's been way too long. Let's not let it be that long again. And again, wish you well as you go through some of the personal sadness that I'm sure you'll have over the next few weeks. But know that a lot of people are on that walk with you.
Thank you, Jon. And the same with you, with your father. I know it's obviously still, it hasn't left you yet, and I can see that. And that, I guess that makes it all the more meaningful of how important he was to you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jon.
Thanks, Curt.